Well, thank you all
Somebody,
for joining us today. I'll go through and introduce myself, and then I'll let Dan and Hope introduce themselves in case you don't know any of us. But we are all the Q-SYS team. So I am the applications engineer for the central part of the United States. So I cover all of our dealers kind of in a 7-state area here, but we're all on the same team. So we kind of cover each other's. So, and then I also have Hope and Dan with me as well.
Hey everybody, I'm moderating today, so I'll be answering your questions in the chat and just helping Tyler out. I am the Ecosystems Communities Platform Manager for Communities, which is just a really long title for saying that I make files to put on communities to save you time. So if you see some of this stuff and you're like, oh, this is pretty cool, I wonder what else I could do with it, come on over to communities, sign up and follow me. And I've got a bunch of stuff on there, reference files for you to use.
yeah, absolutely. I think we're going to feature, if you're not familiar with the reference files and you don't find them between now and then, in May, we're going to be highlighting, we'll be doing a deep dive on just what some of these are, just to kind of give you guys an idea of those folks that are attending here. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm the National Field Training Manager. My name's Dan Walton. So kind of responsible for things that happen in the field, these deep dive webinars, and also our training and experience centers that we continuing to add around the country. So hopefully you make one of those trips. And I see I have a student from a few weeks back, Stephen Schraber. He signed in twice even. That's how extra he is. Thanks. Good to have you on, Stephen. So, all right. We need
Cool.
community sweatshirts, somebody said. All right. All
There
right.
you
Take
go.
it away, Tyler.
All right. So we're going to go through today some HTTP and JSON and how we use those within Q-SYS. So I'm going to start off with a couple just explanations of going through the download and upload commands. So these will be our get and post commands here that we're going to use today to do some different things. So we'll go over kind of how we're going to use that to get some information from a website. And then we're gonna use it to build a cool little box here that's gonna show us some information about some cores. And then we're gonna interact with a REST API, which I have a Falcon player here just running on a Raspberry Pi in my office, and we'll be able to integrate with that, get some information, and then send some information back with that. So I'm going to start here. I just have a couple of examples here. We're just going to go through kind of the structure of how the get command works or download command. So if we start here, let me zoom in so we can all read this a little better. So we're going to start at line 12 here. So this is our download command. At any point in time, if you are unfamiliar or not really sure syntax or whatever you might need, a cool trick is if you click on any of your commands here, if you click help, it will then launch a window on a different screen that you can't see up here in our help guide. And inside of here, there's a lot of good information on how to format things, what every authentication is, user, all that type of stuff. So if you ever get stuck, that's a really cool, useful tool just to go through and kind of figure out what kind of information you need to send to the device or get from the device. So the first thing you'll notice here is that the download command is going to use a table. So we're going to encapsulate it in our brackets here. And then we have some entries in our table. So our first entry is our URL of where we're going to get information from, and then the website here. So this one would go out to google.com and download the website. The next section here, which is probably the trickiest one of all for HTTP, is what type of headers do we need? There are obviously some documentation on different places. If you're working with a REST API or something like that, that they will document the headers. A lot of times, though, this is going to be a scavenger hunt of exactly what do I need to send to this device. A software that's really nice to use and helpful when debugging some of this is Postman. So Postman is a really awesome tool. I use it all the time to kind of qualify my code first, and then I will come back and then populate it back into Q-SYS. It's going to give you information back. It's going to tell you if it works, if it doesn't work, what the errors are, those type of things. And there's also a whole host of examples on Postman that you can go get, specific APIs and play with them. I know one that's kind of easy to start with if you're looking for something to just play around with. If you have a Roku at home, they have a really nice API that you can go through. And it is fully documented in Postman. So there's a whole bunch of examples there to get you started. But their website also has a whole bunch of information as well. So you can notice here that headers. So on the headers tab, if we just have a single line, I could technically just write this as one entry. But if we have multiples, then you do need to encapsulate it into a table. And then obviously if I have more, I would then increment it with a comma and put more headers here. Obviously for this one, we just need the application JSON here for our headers. The next section is timeout. So how long are we going to wait for a response before we just time out the connection? So this is in seconds here, so it's going to wait 30 seconds. And then the event handler. So what is going to fire when this is complete? We are calling the event handler or function done, which is going to come up here and return this information. And this is all documented in the help guide as well. So what this does is this fires this function up here, and then it returns these entries here. So we have a table of everything. We have the success code or error code, any data that is coming back through that connection, which here is going to be our website data, and then any errors, and then the headers that it's going to return from that download function. So then we're going to print this with our string.format. And you can see here, we're printing all that information. The cool part that I like here is we can do some evaluation on errors. So what it's going to print is if there is an error, it will print it. If there isn't one, it will just print the word none next to it. So kind of a cool way to see if there is an error. If not, we can just print none and just move on. All right, let's comment this back out. And let's go to our upload command. So our upload command is how we're going to grab information from somewhere and send it. So here what we have is we're interacting with, well, we don't have anything on this one, but on our URL here, this is where we would normally have what we're sending information to. The method here, so you can have a couple different methods with your upload command. You can have post or put, depending on the type of server you're talking to or device you're talking to, it's going to accept one or the other or both. The post test server that you can test with out online, it's actually version 3 now, not 2. But you can put in post or put, just really depends on what that device or server is looking for. For authentication, you would include your username and password here, and then you would down here, you can put, basic, digest, whatever you want to put in here for your authentication, and then you would put your username and password in the upload table as well. Data is what we're sending to that device, so whatever the API calls for or whatever information it's looking for, this is where we would encapsulate that data. This would be a string here, but it's always a string. You'll notice later we will work with some JSON data. So that is a string by default. Obviously, if we're making a table and doing some replacements in the table, we have to then re-encode it back to JSON so that it sends it as a string and not a table. Just like our other ones here, we have some different headers that we're sending with it. This really can be anything depending on what your device is looking for. And then again, our event handler. So what happens when our upload command is done? We fire the function done and come up here and it's going to return data. These are specific informations that it's going to spit back in this order. You don't have to reference them as table, code, D, and E. You could call them A, B, C, D if you want to. These are just variables referencing the information coming in those specific spots. And again, this is all documented in the help file for the HTTP client, whether it be upload or download. All right, so let's go and do some stuff with this. So we're gonna jump over here. And this, just so you know, after this is over, this file will be sent out to all of you. So you can have a reference. We're gonna build on the left side here, but there is finished examples as well on the right side for you. So if we open this up, we notice we have a download button, which is a trigger. So what we're going to do is we're going to build a command here that we're going to go and grab some information from a website. So if I open up our text controller here, and we get some kind of basic information here. First thing we need to do is we need to write our download command. So I'm going to grab this inside of a function. So I'm going to start our function, and I'm just going to call it download. I'm going to end it right away. Very good habit. If you're not into that, make sure you end your functions or any statement that you start. Otherwise, later on, you will get very, very lost. I'm going to go ahead and print what I'm doing. So I'm going to go ahead and tell my debug window that I'm downloading. And then I'm going to start my command here. So I want to call my HTTP client, and I want to go and download some information from a website. So I know that needs to be encapsulated in a table. My
Hey,
first
Tyler,
entry.
can you zoom in
Oh, yeah. Sorry.
for us old people?
There we go. Okay. So first entry is going to be my URL. And what we're going to do today is we're just going to go download out to the Q-SYS website. So we're just going to go grab that. So HTTP www.qsys. So this is the site that we're going to go grab all the information from. And this is the first entry in my table. So I need to make sure I add a comma after there so it knows that now there's going to be another entry. And my next entry is going to be any of my headers, and I'm going to build that into a table as well. This is just going to be a single line. So what I'm actually going to do is make this look a little bit prettier. So I'm just going to encapsulate this into a table in a single line. I'm not going to have multiple entries because I just have a single entry in my headers table. So I'm going to first off, and this is case sensitive just for everyone. So when you're building these, make sure that, you know, capitals, lowercase, that type of stuff is followed very closely. And our content type is going to be application JSON here. So JSON. And that's the only header that I need to include. So I'm going to put another entry in my table. My next one's going to be our timeout. And I'm just going to set that to 30. And then our last step is our event handler. And we will just call that one done. So now I have a function that I can fire at any time. So obviously I could call this from a button press, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to encapsulate this into a function so that I can call it whenever I need to. And then my function done, which is called right here, I do need to make sure that I define it first. Otherwise, once it gets to this point, if I define it down here, it won't know what function that is and it'll return an error. So I'm going to add my return function up here. So that's going to be done. And then it's going to return basically 5 pieces of information. So first one is our table. Second piece is our error or success code. And then we're going to have data. And then any errors that come in. And then the last step is our table of headers. So then we will end that. And then our first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna print a response so I know exactly what I got back from there. So I'm going to print this to my debug window, and then I'm gonna format this. So I'm gonna use string.format. And I'm now going to kind of build the string how I want it to look. So first thing I'm going to do is in here, I'm just gonna say HTTP response from, and then I'm going to, how string.format works is we can then interject some information by defining the literal string first, and then at the end we can put our data in that we want to replace. So the first thing I want to know is where it came from. So what this is going to be is the URL from our table here. And you'll obviously you wouldn't be able to do this right away if you didn't know what was in the table. I already know it's going to be in this table eventually, but you'll be able to see a way later here in just a minute. We'll print our headers table. We could have done the same thing with our first table that we got back here, and it can tell us all the entries, and then we can go through and parse that out and be like, okay, I want the URL from this table, and that's what we're going to print in right here. So the way that we do that is we tell it is a string. So I'm telling this that the first thing I want to respond with is a string, and I need to encapsulate this just like that. So the first piece of data I'm feeding in is a string. Then I'm going to say that the return code and then I'm going to grab this right here, which is a return code, which is going to be an integer. So that will be %i. And then last piece of information are any of the errors that we want to. So this was all spelled out in that example we had earlier, but I'm going to do error equals, and then any errors that come in, which is going to be a string as well. So I'm going to do %s. I'm going to zoom this out because we're going to have to get a little bit bigger here. So that's the end of our string that we're going to print out. So we're going to add in a comma here. And now we need to put in our variables here that we have. So first thing I need is this %s, which I'm going to grab out of my table. So it's going to be table.url. And then the next piece of information is my error code or success code. So that's just going to be code. And then last piece is any errors that come in. And so what I can do here is I can do an evaluation. So I can do error, or if there are no errors, I can print none. So now
Hey, Tyler,
anytime I get
we got a question in from
Yeah.
Timothy. He said, talk about why are we putting return values in the function definition rather than defining a return value within the function. So I think he's talking about your parameters up at the top.
this here,
So so basically when we call that function done, it's a specific type of function because it's an event handler for an HTTP download. So it's always when that function gets run, it's going to sort of automatically have those parameters in it. That's what's in the parentheses right there. I
Yeah.
think that's what Timothy's talking about. So we're taking data into the function, and it's because we've tied done to a specific type of event handler.
correct. Yeah. So within the HTTP client, this is a specific event handler that's always going to return this information. Now, obviously, if I only wanted the table, I could just define table and leave the rest of it off. But all this information is automatically coming back from this HTTP client download every time. And
Yeah.
then we're
And
calling done.
yeah.
Yep.
And then that or is really helpful too. I want folks to see that. So basically what that says is it's going to print error, but then if error is either nil or basically empty, it will print none, which is a really great way of of encapsulating a bunch of stuff without having to have an if else. And then it's also going to prevent you from throwing a nil reference error. So when you go into your print statement, if it tries to substitute nil in for where %s is, the whole thing's going to error out. So by adding in that error or none, it makes it so that if we didn't get an error, it'll just sort of handle itself for you.
Yeah, nils are bad. You don't want nils. All right. I'm gonna pull this off. That makes it a little bit easier to go. All right, so the next step here is we want to get to our headers now so we can see exactly what's coming back. So we are going to print headers. So these are be any of the headers that we're going to receive. And headers is a table. So if I try to just print the table, I'm just going to get a data location of where that table exists. Now, if I want to grab all the information out of that table, we can use a for loop to then parse through that table and say, okay, first entry is this, second entry is this, and we can kind of go through and see all that information. So let's run a for loop on our headers table. So first thing I'm going to do is I need to assign 2 values. So first entry is just going to be, and we're going to use pairs here. So that way we can return the key and the value rather than just an iterative pair where we're just going to return, integer 1 through 5 or whatever it may be. So my first variable is going to be the name of the header. And then second one is just going to be whatever the value is. And then we are going to do this in pairs. Run that on headers. So now we're running a loop. So every time we're going to run through this, first entry is going to print out. So what we're going to do is we want to print this information. And then we're going to do a format here as well so we can return it in the right format for us to look at. So just like we did earlier, we'll do string.format. And our string is going to be, our first entry is going to be, we're going to add a space in here. So let's do T, some sign S. And then we're going to do equals and then %sign S again. So we have basically 2 strings that we're going to return out of here. So first one is going to be our name. So we're going to do H name, comma, value. So what this will do now is it'll run through and print out the name and value in this format right here. And then our last one's going to be our big data dump. This is going to be a lot of information that we're going to get back from this. So I'm going to return the line and then I'm going to do HTML data. And once we print this data out, we're going to get back our data from our table up here. So I'm going to concatenate that on to the end of this. So if I do 2 dots here and do data, now what this is going to do is return the line. It's going to say HTML data, and then it's going to print out a whole bunch of information here. So what we've done now is we have a function to call our return function, but we have nothing in the program right now to actually call this one. So what I'm going to do is we have a control already that exists for this. So I'm going to go to my control and there is a download and we're just going to call its event handler. And then we're going to call down. Ooh. Down. There we go. So now if we emulate, we'll see. Cool. All right. So all the syntax is correct. So then if we come over here and trigger download, and you will see all sorts of information that's coming back. For some reason, that window doesn't want to get bigger. So let's come up here and see what we got. So you can see here that first thing we did was we printed downloading, and then it went through and we got our event handler to fire. We came back up here and now we got HTTP response from, and here's our website that we printed. Then our return code was a good return code or 200. And then we didn't get any errors, so we printed none. Here's all of the headers that it returned. And then here is the entire website that got returned in data. So you can see this is a ton of information. This is a practice I would highly recommend you don't try to return an entire website in a download command. But this just kind of shows how we can use any URL to then grab information from. All right, so let's now go and actually do something useful with our download command. So I'm going to go ahead and close these out. And now what we can do is we're going to use this to go grab a JSON file off of a website, and then we can return and parse this information and actually do something with this. So let's go ahead and I'm going to open this up. So first thing you'll see is we have a list box here, and then we have some text boxes here for our network IO and AEC and VoIP. And then we have a LED showing if that core specifically has an IO USB bridge. So if we go ahead and open this up, first thing you'll notice here is we have a library definition up here at the top. So we're going to use the rapid JSON library in order to decode the JSON efficiently. And then we have a space where we can define our tables. And then we're going to go down here and add some information in so we can go grab this cores.json file off of the AWS site, and then we can do some parsing with that. So first thing I need to do is I know I need a couple of tables. So I'm going to return a list of the cores that are in this list. And then I am going to need one more table so that I can evaluate the cores. And so I'm going to add one more table called cores list. Now let's go ahead, and we already know kind of our structure here. So let's go and create our download commands here. So instead of typing this a million times for you, I'm gonna just come and copy this out of here. So we're gonna grab our download function and pop it in here. And then we already have our return function here.
Don't forget to zoom in.
And don't forget to zoom in. That's why I have hope here, so that I don't forget these things. All right, so now we have all of this information here ready to go. What we're going to do though is we don't need any of our headers or data, anything like that. We don't need to print that out. So I'm going to go ahead and just remove that. So now what we'll do is we'll get a response here, and we can see all the information that we're getting. And then we have our download function right here. So instead of going to our Q-SYS.com URL, we already have a variable up here called URL. Notice it's capitalized. So the table entry in the download command is capital U, lowercase RL. Our variable is capital URL. Obviously, if I was doing this, I would probably change that to a different term. That's a little confusing, but it highlights that Lua is very case sensitive. So make sure when you're naming things that you name them appropriately. That way you don't get stuck later on. For our headers here, so we need application JSON, and then we also need one more header, and that's going to be our accept. So I'm going to add one more entry here. Then our accept header is just going to be our accept all. And this is where Postman comes in, because you can get a lot of this information out of Postman really easily rather than having to remember or do any of those. But this is a command that you can include a lot of times. It's not going to give you an error most of the time. So this is really a safe one usually to include. And then our event handler, I'm going to call this download done. just like that. So if I call that one, we need to come up here and make sure this calls the same function. And now I can go get some information from our device. So once I download that table or that JSON string, I want to put it into a table. So what I can do is I'm going to add it into my cores table that we created up here at the top. So I can say cores equals, and then I am going to use our JSON function here. So I'm going to do JSON dot decode. And what I want to do is we know what we're getting back from it already because it's cores.json. So that's going to be included in our data here. So now I can just include that as data. So that's going to be the entire list of the cores JSON file. Now what I want to do is I want to pull out the core names out of that. So there's a whole bunch of information in there. First thing I want to return is just the core names. So I'm going to run a ipairs loop on there. So I'm going to say for index control ipairs. And so that's now in a table that I can manipulate and go through. So I'm going to do cores dot core do. So now it's going to iterate through that table and return all the cores. And then what I can do is I can insert those names into a table. So I'm going to say table.insert, and the table that I want to insert or pull them into is our core list. And the entry that I want to pull out of our cores.core is the name of the core. Make sure we don't capitalize things. So now I have this list right here, this core list, which is going to have all the names of the core inside of it. And so the last thing I want to do is I want to populate our list box of our cores. So I'm going to go controls core model. And then the way we populate a list box or a combo box is the .choices. And then we can just set that equal to our core list table. Cool. So now we have all that. If we come down here and we add in our download command, we can then get that information. So if I do download and I save this, come into here, and I did something wrong. All right, let's see. Let's restart this. Oops, closed the wrong window. Let's open up. All right, let's see what I. Oh. Capitalization matters. All right, there we go. So now if I come back here, now you'll notice that I have a list of all the cores that we pulled out of that JSON file. And obviously I know all the information that's in that file just for speed here. But normally what you do is you return the JSON file, you'd parse through it and see all the information that you need out of it. And then you would be able to manipulate and work with that file later on. All right, so now that we have the list of all of our cores, our last step that we need to do is we want to know which core is selected, and then we want to populate this list based off of which core we can pull the information out of that table associated with those entries there. So if we come down here and we do our controls, and we want our core model, and every time that core model changes, we want to update those values. So that's going to be our event handler. And then we're going to create a function, and we're going to pass in our control of this core model selection here. So now we're going to run another ipairs loop on our cores.core So we're gonna say for value. And that's gonna be on cores.core. And then we are going to do something with that. All right, so first thing I want to know is which core is selected. So what I know already is that I'm passing in my control here. So what I can do is I want to know if that control matches any of the core names in my list, which is going to be my V variable here. So what I can say is V if V dot name, which is the entry out of the core table, is equal to the CTL dot string, then we want to do something with that. So now I know that my selection equals one of the entries in my table. And now what I can do is I can come in and populate all of my strings here. So my first control that we're going to work with is our network IO. And that one's going to be a string. And so what we can do now is set that equal to, because we already know that b.name is selected and equal to our string. So we can just come into that table and say v dot network. And this is where your auto populate is not helpful. So network IO is the entry in that table. Network IO here is the control name. So make sure if you do use the autofill that you're very you're watching that very carefully, because that did autofill that to a capital N, which would error out. Our next step here is our controls dot. Let's see which one is. Yeah. So next one's going to be our AEC channels. So it's going to be controls dot AEC channels. That one is also a string. And we can set that one to v dot, and the entry in the table is number. We got two more here. So controls dot VoIP instances. This one's also a string. Now I'm going to show you a different way that we can, the different syntax for recalling this specific information. So we're returning that out of the cores.core table. So that's the whatever entry it is. We don't really care what number it is, but we want to know the name. So we already know that it's the V name here out of there. So another way that we can show this is if we say cores.core.
Zoom in for us a little bit.
Oh, yeah.
When you're on Zoom, you have to zoom. Wow, look at that.
Zoom. There we go.
Thanks.
Yeah. So on the cores.core table, we want to know the entry number, which we already going to know once this V is equal. So we can return this K value, which is going to be, 1 through however many entries we have in this table. So if I come out here and I say cores.core K, and then this is going to be our entry in the table now. So this is going to be, for this entry, it's going to be number 4. So cores.core K is equal to V here. So we can either evaluate it or write it out this way or as B. Obviously, this is a lot easier, and we already know because we're returning that with our iPairs loop, but you could go directly to the cores.core and grab that whole table and then just tell it, hey, whatever K is equal to, I want that number VoIP. So there's a few ways to do this. Obviously, in this fashion, this is a lot easier and much more efficient to do it this way. And then our last step is our Boolean. So this is our little LED here, and we want to grab our v dot USB, just like that. So now every time this changes, we're going to return all this information out of here. So if I go ahead and save it here, now when I click on my different cores, this table now populates with the specific core that's associated with it. So you can see if I go to a 510, obviously I don't have USB, and it's telling me how many total channels, AEC, and VoIP instances I can run on that. Cool. All right, so now we're going to work with a specific device here. So open this up here. So this is the Falcon player that I have installed on a Raspberry Pi here in my office. So here is the API information. So I pulled this right out of the manual or the API documentation for it. So what we can do here is we can write in a get command here. So if we open up our table, what we're going to do is we're going to go and grab the 3 playlists that are on there. So let me pull this down so you can see. So this is the Falcon player right now. So we have 3 playlists: Cloud Lights, Running Lights, and Spotlights. So those are the 3 playlists that are running on that Falcon player. So we want to go return that list of information. So let's go ahead and let's open this up here, and we can write some code to go grab that. And then what we're eventually going to do then is we're going to use this information to then populate another control where we're going to send information back to the device. So that way we can tell it to play or stop a specific playlist. So we already have our library definition for decoding JSON. So that's already in there. Now what we can do is let's go ahead and let's grab our download command. So just to save time, instead of writing it from scratch, I'm going to come up here and grab it out of here. So I am going in and we're grabbing all this information.
Tyler,
So
this is your periodic reminder to zoom your screen in.
gosh, I'm horrible at zooming.
Now I think you're just trolling us.
I am. I'm just making sure you guys are paying attention.
Dan and I are both taking turns staying awake.
I'm just making sure your glasses are working. So. All right, so what we have is our commands here. So our first thing we want to do is let's go back to our API documentation here, and you can see that what we're going to be referencing or where we're grabbing this from is API/playlists. So the URL that we're going to go grab this from is right here. So that's local on my network. So it is 238, and then it'll be API/playlist. So now we have the location of what we're looking for. If we go back to our API command here, our headers are accept, and then the host IP address, which will be our right here. So our first one, we can get rid of content type. This is going to be accept. Forget your commas, otherwise you'll be angry later, or it will be angry later. All right, so let's do this. And then our last entry here is going to be our host. And that's going to be a string as well, and that's going to be our IP address. 8. So it'll be just like that. Our timeout's going to be 30 seconds, and then our event handler up here will also be called done. So what we're going to do is we are just going to print our data. So we don't need to run the loop on our headers here. So that's going to print the data that's coming back. Let's go ahead and create a variable called table playlist. And that's going to be table, sorry. That's going to be our data that came back, but it is going to return it as JSON, so we need to decode it. It's going to be our data. And then what we can do now is then populate it to our table or our list box. So it's going to be controls playlist dot choices. And then this is just going to equal our list of playlists. So just like that. And so now if we run this, you can see down here, this is the data that we got back. So I don't know that I can zoom in this, but we'll try. Yeah, I can, sorry. But what it returned was a table of cloud lights, running lights, spotlights. So if we come down here to our now we have cloud lights, running lights, and spotlights in our playlist, and we can select those here. So now we're going to export these out of this box here, and they will now populate down into our playlist down here. So now that we know which selection we've made, we can now then affect the play or stop function of those. So now if we jump to that guy, you can see it's already ingested into our string here. So all I have to do is let's come in here and let's open that up. And now let's look at the documentation for this. So here's our API documentation for sending commands to this device. So you can see here that we need a get or a post command here. And then we have playlist names and the functionality to start a playlist. And then here's the API information for stopping a playlist. And then the specific headers that are needed for this. So now instead of using our download command, we are going to post some information out to our playlist. So let's go ahead and let's save some time here. Let's go grab our upload command. This. Now we have it on here, and I'm going to zoom in so Hope doesn't yell at me. There we go. Okay, so now we have our information for sending information out to a device. Now we need to format this. So let's go back here and look at our API. So this is how we're going to send it. So it's going to be IP address, API, and then our command. So that's our URL. So let's go here. And then this will be API / command. And then our method is going to be post. We do not need a username or a password. Our data, which is what we're going to be sending out, is how this is where we're going to create our data. So I'm just going to use this as a variable. So I'm going to call this JSON data. And we will build this data here in a minute. But for now, I'm just going to format our command that's going to send out first. Our first one that we need, so let's go here, is we need content type, content length, and our host. So if we come here, so content type, show look application JSON. So let's do this. So there's our first entry. Our second one is our content length. So there we go. Content. And so obviously this is going to change based off of what we're sending it. So a cool trick is if you use the pound sign and then put in JSON underscore data, that is going to give me the length of JSON data. So that's a really quick way of whenever JSON data changes, once we send this out, it will just go look at JSON data and say, hey, it's 27 characters long. This becomes 27. And then our last entry is going to be our URL or our host. So host. And then this is, and there's our IP address of our device. And then we'll print a response that we're going to get each time up here. And now, delete that out. And now we're going to come down here and we're going to build our commands for when we hit play and when we hit stop. So let's look at our play API first. So you can see here, start playlist. Here's the information that it wants each time we send it out. So it wants the name of our playlist, and then it wants just false and false. So if we come over to our window, our triggering event is going to be, we're going to hit play. It's going to be our event handler. And that will be our function. Let's go ahead and end it. And the first thing I want to do is I want to build my command that I'm going to send each time. So I'm going to create a local variable. And let's call this table. And now let's build that table that we're going to use for according to our API. So we can look here, our first entry needs to be command start playlist. Command. Then it's going to be command equals and then our next entry here, so that was our command. Then we have arguments. Arguments here. And that's going to be another table. So you notice here it's inside of another table here. So our first entry is going to be our playlist that we want to select. And we already know that we have that selected in our controls.playlist.string right here. So whichever one of these is selected, we will automatically pop it into this one. And then our next two were false, false. So now we have our local variable called table command that's built for whichever playlist has been selected. So now we can come down and we can fire our information. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to just print that so I can see exactly what I'm sending out. So we need to, because this is a Lua table, not a JSON string currently, I need to re-encode that back into JSON to send it back out. So what I can do is reference table command. So now this is going to print out the JSON string that I'm going to be sending out. And then our last one here is, mess this up. I'm going to pass this through in my variable. So every time I call my upload command, I'm going to pass in my JSON data to it. So if I come down here, call in upload, and then it's already telling me, hey, I need the JSON data, which I know is the table command. So because I encoded it here doesn't mean that it's automatically encoded in the next step. So I need to make sure that I include that command or that JSON encode right here as well. So now I have the one for my play function. And now we just need to build our stop. Controls dot stop event handler. It local. And because it's a local variable, I can reuse this name up here. So I'm just going to go ahead and call it the same. So I'm going to have table command. Then let's look at our API again. This one's much easier. So this one's just stop now and a blank table of arguments. So this one's going to be equals stop now. Arguments. And then just a blank table. So there's our functionality for our stop command. So then let's just go ahead and some time. So now I'm going to print that again, and then I'm going to post it to that server and re-encode all that information. So now, see our script started. I'm going to try to put these next to each other so you guys can see them at the same time. Cool. All right, so now you can see, let's go to our spotlights, hit play. You can see here that we selected spotlights and it's currently playing, and we can stop it and it stopped spotlights. I can go to running lights, hit play, and change to running lights, and now it's playing our running lights. And then I can stop that as well. Cool. All right, that was a lot of information to fit in an hour. So if there are any questions or anything that we didn't cover during that time, let me know. I did, just so you know, I did skip this post section. You'll get this, but there is a, I'm gonna open the saved one up here for you guys. There is a post server that we've created here that you can play around with. So this is just a website that you can send literally anything you want to it. It's called a toilet because you're dumping information into it. I think that's great. But so you can go out there, look at this. If you use this link, you can open this up. See if I can. Yeah, I can't do it from within Q-SYS, but you can open that link up and you'll see the information that you're sending it, and anything that you put in data will come in there and you'll be able to read it out on that site. So that's a really useful site for practicing uploading information to a specific site. Obviously, there's no authentication or anything like that, so it's pretty basic. A lot of the things that you're going to be interacting with pretty much from here on out are going to have some form of authentication, returning a token, implementing a token, stuff like that. So I know Kevin Rodas and I were talking about creating a modified version of this to then go over authentication and how we interact with devices that require tokens and that type of stuff. So be on the lookout for that sometime. I'm not sure, whenever we get time to create that. So. Are there any lingering questions?
None in the queue.
Perfect.
Right on.
Well, yeah, if there's anything else you guys have, I'll stick around for a little bit if there's any questions that come up. Otherwise, really appreciate all you guys joining us this morning.
Absolutely. I think actually New Random Toilet was a band I was in college.
Got a lot of nice thank yous, and the the auth and tokens is yes please.
Yeah, we are going to be working on that for sure to get you guys examples of that. We're also going to be working on a fusion. What's that?
I said in your tremendous amounts of free time.
Yeah, we
I
always
was just
have.
gonna say,
Yeah.
if only there was someone whose job it was to create content for some sort of online community, you could have
That
them.
would be.
You could
Yeah.
have them help you with it.
We could. I'll have to see if there's anyone on our team like that.
The price of yarn skyrocketing. She doesn't have it. She can't afford to crochet all day, so she's ready to write some code. So, or do you knit or crochet? I can't remember.
I'm a knitter, Dan.
Oh, you're
Actually,
a knitter.
I do both.
Sorry, I don't know if that's offensive. You know, like if you call a knitter a crocheter or vice versa.
I do both. I do both here.
I saw some cool cat swings that you can put underneath a crochet or knit to put underneath a counter height chairs. But
there you go.
we can sidetrack on that later.
Someone
Uh,
asked about when this data will be posted. Usually it's a couple of days. So I'll send the information off to our team and they will reply and you'll get a recording of this webinar plus the file that we were working with today. So
Perfect. Great
Awesome.
job, both of you guys. Thank you much. Is there any included method to filter down the info you get back in JSON, or is it just going to be better to take everything and filter within your receive function?
yeah, so JSON is a string, so you're always going to get all of the information. And then, yeah, so within your receive function, then you can filter down of exactly what you want. So it's JSON, looks odd because it looks like a table, but it is actually, a big long string that you're going to then have to parse. So the best way to do that is convert it into a table and then parse through that table and get the information out that you need. Obviously, there's a string doesn't take up much memory, so you're not going to use a whole bunch that way. So.
Yeah, I would say my personal preference for something like that is I take that JSON, I print it out, and then I put it in VS Code to make it a lot easier to see.
Yeah.
And then at that point, you can kind of see the structure and figure it out. If it's just a few things like what we had today, you're probably better off just having one parse function. But it can get pretty complicated pretty quickly. Another plug for some of my communities files. We do have some parsing stuff in the command send and receive examples in there. But what you can do is you can say if it's this, use this parse function. If it's this type of data, use that type of parse function and kind of break it up that way.
I mean, I'm a beginning coder, and I'm dealing with for fun, a Sony consumer AV receiver, and it sends back JSON strings, but I'm just needing like, hey, I just need to parse this. If it says volume at the beginning, give me that number, right? I mean, so it's very simple and basic, but I can see it if I needed to mine more data from that, obviously getting the JSON string into a table is going to be way easier and less work. So, but
Yep.
There's also VS Code has a cool, I don't know what they call it, plugin, add-on, whatever, called JSON Crack. That works amazing because it basically, if you have a big table, it's kind of hard to look at. JSON Crack breaks it out into a big graphical representation, and you can really, if I need to get to this specific part of the JSON string, it'll tell me my path right to there and all the entry numbers and everything like that. And that's a very, very useful tool. I think Aaron showed me that. Hope and Dan. It was
Aaron
awesome.
Darnell, 100 points
Oh
for
yeah.
JSON Crack.
Yeah, Aaron. There you go, Aaron. Yeah, Aaron's the one that showed me that. It was great. Like it changed my life when I found that. I was like, man, this is so much easier. The first way I was trying to do it.
I was
So.
hoping that it was another acronym like JSON. I was hoping it was like KRAC or, like it stood for something. Just
No, you're just cracking open the JSON and
I
being
got you.
able to see it. So yeah, it's great. So.
Perfect. Yeah, for those people that didn't see the questions, it's JSON CRACK. Just like crack open the file. There you go.
Yep. Yeah. And if you're not using add-ons to VS Code, I would look through those. There's so many really good ones in VS Code that make your life so much easier. So
Yep.
there's also a cool one for plugins, isn't there? Hope like a Q-SYS plugin add-on to.
There's a starter file that you can use to set up VS Code.
Is that what it is? Okay, I thought we had like an add-on to. I was gonna open it here because I had a whole bunch installed. There's an extension, yeah, Lua for Q-SYS plugins. So it's
I'm
pretty
gonna have to
fancy.
play with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it looks like it was written by Shorty456132.
You know him
Or her, or
or
them.
her. Sorry, I shouldn't
Oh,
assume. Yeah,
I don't know them, no.
That person.
But
that person. Yeah.
I'll have to check it out.
Here's the JSON crack that we were talking about. It's great. So.
Perfect.
Cool. All righty. Well,
Oh,
There's
it
no
says
other
here, thanks for the
questions?
tip. Probably beats taking the info and spitting it into a browser. Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right,
Yeah, there
everyone.
are online JSON tools and stuff like that, but yeah, if VS Code, and I mean, you can see right here, it's kind of previewing it for you, but once you, I mean, big chart and click on it, it tells you exactly the path to get there. So very helpful. Awesome. Well, thanks everyone for joining, and we'll catch you next time.
Have a good one.
Great day.
Thank you.
Bye.